History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going back to a location that we did back in 2015, so about 9 years ago. Everybody's heard of this place, the Lizzie Borden House.
Are you sure? I'm not. It doesn't quite ring a bell.
Not ringing a bell for you?
No.
Well, I'll ring a bell for you.
Ring my bell.
Kelly, are you ready to go back?
I'm ready. Growing up, many of us sang a rhyme about the crime attributed to Lizzie Borden that began, Lizzie Borden took an axe. But did this young woman actually commit the crime for which she was accused and acquitted? What happened to the Borden family inside their home is not in dispute. 2 people were murdered with an axe. What is unclear is how they came to that end. And perhaps that is why there are reputedly hauntings at this Fall River, Massachusetts home. Come with us as we explore the home, the family, the crime, and the hauntings connected to the Lizzie Borden house.
Andrew Jackson Borden was born in 1822 in Massachusetts. He married Sarah Anthony Morse, and they had 3 daughters, Emma, Alice, and Lizzie. Lizzie was born the youngest of those 3 daughters, and only she and her sister Emma survived to adulthood. Their mother Sarah died when Lizzie was only 2 years old. Andrew was seen as a reclusive man, although highly successful. He was believed to have been extremely tight with his money, as he had started out in life with little means and never changed his spending habits, even as his fortune grew. He would come to be one of the richest men in Fall River, Massachusetts. He was not very well liked, however, because he was always in a sour mood and lacked humor. Just 2 years after Sarah's death, in 1865, Andrew married Abby Durfee Gray. She was considered a spinster by the community, and she was not very well off. Andrew needed help raising his 2 girls. The situation was ideal for both of them, and it was a mutually supportive marriage.
The Borden house was built in 1845 by Southard Miller for a man named Charles Trafton in Fall River, Massachusetts. It was originally meant to be a 2-family home. In 1872, Andrew bought the large house for his family of 4. The house had wall-to-wall carpeting on the 1st and 2nd floors, which was considered a luxury at the time. Andrew remodeled to make the home more spacious by knocking out a wall on the 1st floor. Radiators provided central heating. There was a bathroom in the cellar with a pull-chain toilet. I love those. They're so cool looking.
Some of the older mansions still have those.
Well, we've visited a few.
Yes.
The parlor was decorated with lace curtains. Despite the home being large, both Borden daughters felt the house was beneath their station in life. In 1889, the family hired Bridget Sullivan, an Irish immigrant, to help with the household chores. The home was large and comfortable, and from the outside, everything seemed well in the Borden home. But that was not the case.
On June 24th, 1891, the Borden home was robbed. The only thing disturbed in the home was Andrew's small desk. Stolen from the home were a lady's gold watch with a chain and locket, a bunch of horse car tickets, and a small sum of money. This was during daylight hours. It is believed that Andrew and Abby considered Lizzie the prime suspect and insisted that all family doors were to be kept locked from this point forward. And to explain to people why this was like, why would they point the finger at Lizzie and then lock all these doors or whatever? They're not just talking about the outside doors, like they left an outside door open. The way the house is set up, you have to go through one room to get to another room to get to another room. Apparently that's why they were like, it had to have been Lizzie because it's somebody who had access to all this stuff. In a bizarre incident, Andrew took a hatchet and killed all of Lizzie's pet pigeons sometime in the late spring-summer of 1892. I'm guessing as some kind of punishment to her. Emma left the home in the summer of 1892 after some kind of a huge family fight and went to stay with friends of the family. So clearly there's some unhappiness here inside the house. She was still there at the time of the murders of her father and stepmother. The morning of August 3rd in 1892, Abby went to the doctors complaining of severe illness that she and Andrew suffered the night before and allegedly made mention of her fear that the family was being poisoned. Interestingly, around this same time, Lizzie attempted to purchase poison to combat moths that were eating a fur coat she owned from the local drugstore. But she was told that she would need a prescription for it. Can you imagine a prescription to get poison for moths?
Does sound a little odd.
Rumors have survived to this day that Lizzie was not just a spinster living at home, but that she and her father had some kind of incestuous relationship. So we might have this going on, then we have some arguing going on.
The family was active in the Central Congregational Church. Lizzie herself joined the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Christian Endeavor Society. Her activities with these types of organizations earned her the respect of two ministers, William Walter Jubb and Edwin A. Buck. She was a Sunday school teacher, and many considered her a hard worker. It would come as quite a shock when she was arrested and tried. On August 4th, 1892, Emma was with friends. Uncle John Morris had come to visit on the 3rd, and he had stayed overnight. The maid Bridget was up at 6 a.m. to get a fire stoked and breakfast started. Andrew, Abby, and Uncle John came down an hour later. Everyone sat and ate for an hour, but Lizzie did not join them. She slept late. Uncle John left after breakfast, and Lizzie came down complaining she felt ill. Bridget herself threw up later that morning. A little after 9 a.m., Andrew headed out for business, and Abby asked Bridget to wash the windows while she made up Uncle John's bed. Bridget got the outside of the windows done around 10:30 a.m. and headed inside to do the interior of the windows.
Interestingly, with Lizzie getting sick or saying that she feels sick and then Bridget actually getting physically sick, it kind of makes you think, well, did they all get food poisoning? Because that was the first thing that people thought is maybe it was just food poisoning that everybody got, not actual poisoning. It kind of leaves a little bit of doubt or question there about whether Lizzie really did poison anybody. Of course, she could have poisoned Bridget too and then pretended like she didn't feel well. So Andrew Borden is gone off to work, and now he's arrived home after this time when Bridget had come inside to do the interior of the windows. So Bridget lets him in, and Lizzie told him that Abby went to visit a sick neighbor. Because he's probably hollering around, "Where's Abby? Hey, Abby, I'm home." He probably came home maybe for lunch at that time. I'm not sure. And maybe he still wasn't feeling well. We don't know. And the interesting thing is that Bridget had to let him in. So I don't know if he didn't have a key to the house to get in. So she had to let him in. Andrew grabbed the key to his room and headed up the back stairs. And as we said earlier, the reason why he needed that key is because now they're in the habit of locking all the doors in the house all the time. These people don't trust the outside world, and they clearly don't trust each other. Lizzie went down to heat the iron, and Andrew returned downstairs and sat on a sofa in the sitting room and began reading the newspaper. Bridget retired to her room, but was awakened by the shouts of Lizzie a little after she had drifted off to sleep. Lizzie was shouting that her father was dead. She sent Bridget off for the doctor.
The doctor's house was across the street, but he was not there. Bridget returned with his wife, and several neighbors came as well. They all asked Lizzie where she had been when her father was murdered. Keep in mind that the house was kept locked tight. Lizzie claimed that she had gone to the barn to get an iron for fishing sinkers and had left the door unlocked. Then there were, of course, the question about where Abby was, and suddenly Lizzie had no idea. Then she threw out a comment about her father having an enemy and how the family had been poisoned by milk. Now, wait a minute. Abby was the one mentioning that she thought the family had some kind of poisoning, and there is not much doubt she suspected Lizzie. And how would Lizzie know it was the milk that was poisoned? And why throw that out there right after finding your father bludgeoned to death? Shouldn't she be a bit traumatized from the scene? The crime scene photos and autopsy photos are hard to look at.
Yeah, I mean, this is a woman who should be going crazy.
Freaking out.
First of all, to see such a horrible thing, your father has been, basically his head is just pulverized. So that's enough to make you go, And then you may not like your dad, but at least show a little bit of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. And earlier she had told her father that Abby was off meeting with a neighbor or something. Now all of a sudden she's like, oh, I have no idea where she's at.
Right. If the accounts are true, the way it plays out, I mean, it is very bizarre.
Yeah. The doctor finally arrives and observes that a sharp object was used to deliver 11 blows, not 40.
Not 40 whacks?
Yeah, as the song goes, to Andrew's head, making him unrecognizable. An eye was cut in half and his nose was gone.
Yeesh.
Blood was sprayed up to the ceiling, across the wall, the floor, and was still seeping from the wounds. So this is pretty fresh. A neighbor and Bridget went to see if Abby was upstairs after Lizzie mentioned that she thought she'd heard Abby come home while she was out at the barn. If you're in the barn, how did you hear somebody come in the house?
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
So now Lizzie's story has gone from, I don't know where she's gone to, I think she came home. The neighbor found Abby next to the bed in Uncle John's room, lying face down in a pool of blood. She had been making the bed and seems to have been struck by a sharp object from behind. The coroner later revealed that Abby had received more blows than Andrew. She had been struck 19 times. The blood was congealed, meaning she had been killed before Andrew, and more than likely at least an hour before, meaning it happened while Andrew was out and while she was supposedly at an ailing neighbor's house, according to Lizzie. Now would be a good time to mention that the girls referred to Abby as Mrs. Borden because they disliked the woman. They never considered her a mother and fought often. This is more than likely why Emma was no longer living at the house. Whoever perpetrated this crime had a lot of anger towards these two victims, and especially Abby, since she got more of them.
Now, where are the cops? It would seem that they were away for their annual picnic. Only one officer was at the station. He ran to the house and saw that Andrew was dead and ran back to the station. So no one is watching the crime scene. As happened with the Villisca Axe murder house, the scene was overrun by looky-loos. Any evidence was quickly destroyed. Based on Lizzie's comments about the milk, the medical examiner sent the milk and stomachs to Harvard for testing where no poison was found. Another autopsy was conducted after the funerals. The burials were prevented so this could be done. Both of the couple's heads were removed so the skulls could be studied. The skulls were later interred with the rest of the remains.
Lizzie and Emma were the heirs to Andrew's small fortune, and suspicion fell to Lizzie. Bridget was brought in for questioning as well, but she was never charged with anything. Lizzie was charged. The evidence was weak at best. No murder weapon was found. A hatchet that was found in the cellar had been cleaned and then purposefully dirtied, so it could not be proven that it was used in the crime. Lizzie burned a dress, but she claimed there had been paint on it, and so that's why she destroyed it. Yeah. There was nothing to go on other than the fact that Lizzie and Bridget were at the house at the time of the murder, and Lizzie was being evasive. But this isn't enough to convict anyone, whether it was back then or today. The trial lasted 14 days, and the jury acquitted Lizzie. And Kelly, you and I were discussing this the other day. I don't even know what other crime we were talking about, but the Casey Anthony crime. And I'd said, I watched a lot of that trial, and if I was on that jury, I think she did it. But I probably would have acquitted her as well because the evidence isn't there.
Right.
And that's the case here. I mean, everything is making Lizzie look guilty as all get out. She had the means, she had the motive, she had the time, but you just don't have the other stuff. We don't have the DNA and fingerprints and all this other stuff back then. And then you had people tramping through, so everything's contaminated.
There was a 24-year-old star crime reporter named Henry G. Trickey who wrote for the Boston Globe. After the crime, he spent 6 weeks gathering information from witnesses and the detectives on the case, and he broke a story that Lizzie had been pregnant at the time of the murders and that she killed her father because he found out and was outraged and was going to throw her out of the house and write her out of the will. Newspaper hoaxes were quite the thing during the 19th century and were written without much verification to boost circulation. If Trickey had interviewed Lizzie's doctor, he would have known that Lizzie had never been pregnant. Eventually, the story had to be retracted and a front-page apology was made. A grand jury later indicted Trickey in the winter of 1892 for witness tampering. He fled to Canada, and while rushing to catch a train, he slipped and fell under the train's wheels, killing him instantly. Karma?
Yeah, might have been a little bit of karma there. This is, back during yellow journalism and stuff, too. Anything to get the story. Although the case was circumstantial, it's hard not to believe that Lizzie perpetrated this crime. Her motive? Money would have been a main factor as her father held onto it tightly and Lizzie wanted to spend it. And Andrew had told people he was changing his will to make Abby sole heir and give nothing to his daughters. So that would be like kind of a triggering thing that would have happened here. Because like, what happened at this point that has pushed her over the edge? Well, that would do it if you think you're going to get written out of the will.
Sure.
It was no secret that there were family issues as well. The killer would have had to have entered a locked home. The place was always locked, and even if it were unlocked because Bridget was outside cleaning the windows, would she not have seen someone come into the house? Wouldn't Lizzie have heard the person come in and at least heard something as Abby fell and was bludgeoned? Then the killer would have had to have waited at least an hour for Andrew to get home. This person would have had to have hoped that no one would find Abby in the meantime. And also, how did you know that Andrew was coming home?
Right.
Clearly, Lizzie had lied about Abby running off to a neighbor's house since Abby never left the house. And Lizzie said she knew Abby had left because she'd left a note, which was never found. Lizzie claimed that she had been in the loft of the barn looking for iron when the murder of her father occurred. The loft was thick with dust, and no footprints were found. I mean, if you're walking across the loft, you would have left something behind. No one had been up there for some time. The only thing that brings some doubt is the question as to why Lizzie was not covered in blood. Even if she had changed dresses, or some have theorized that she killed while she was in the nude, she would have had it at least in her hair. I mean, you've got blood flicking everywhere.
Right.
Although I did read something a few days ago that described her wearing some kind of a rubber hood. I don't know if she, was in this dress and then had a rubber hood on to cover her head. And so that's why she didn't have anything in her hair. And I don't know if they just didn't look very close at her boots, because I would assume there'd be some blood in the boots. I'm sure they were made out of leather. Was it possible that a stranger had committed the murders? And is there truth to the gossip that Andrew had an illegitimate son who was the axe wielder? We'll never know. But of course, those were some of the things that were put out there. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Lizzie and Emma moved from the house 5 weeks after Lizzie was acquitted. They bought a large home up on the hill, which was the posh part of town, and named the home Maplecroft. Lizzie never married, but this could be because she may have been gay. On the seedy side of things, Lizzie met a beautiful actress named Nancy O'Neill in Boston, and it was rumored that they carried on a long affair. And there are theories that Bridget and Lizzie were having an affair, and the discovery of this might have prompted the murders. Lizzie died on June 1st, 1927, at the age of 67. It was due to complications from gallbladder surgery.
Now, of course, a lot of people are like, Bridget was there in the house, and if she was cleaning windows, how did she not see or hear something? Well, if you're on the outside, maybe not. And there are a lot of windows to this house, so if she was over on another side, I'm sure Lizzie would have made sure that she was not, actually cleaning the windows in the John Morse room at the time. I just don't know how she would have missed her if she was cleaning all the interior windows.
Right.
So I don't know if she didn't clean the windows in that room. I kind of feel like Bridget had to know something. And maybe because she, I don't know, either she and Lizzie were together or they were at least friends, or Lizzie, I don't know, might have promised her something to keep her quiet. I'm not sure. The Lizzie Borden House has passed through several hands over the years. Lizzie and her sister sold it in 1918, and it has served many purposes. The home has been a boarding house, a printing business was once located inside, as well as a toy shop. An insurance man lived in it as a home, and today it is a bed and breakfast that doubles as a museum. The house was turned into a bed and breakfast in 1996 by Martha McGinn and Ronald Evans, who inherited the house because Martha's grandparents purchased the house in 1948. In 2004, Donald Woods and Leanne Wilbers bought the house, and they added much of the murder paraphernalia that was put into the house. Entrepreneur Lance Zoll bought the house in May of 2021. He is the founder and owner of U.S. Ghost Adventures, which runs ghost tours across the country, and he also owns the Villisca Axe Murder House now, Kelly.
Interesting. Well, we do plan on getting back there again.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's a whole different setup now. The woman who used to own it, she and her husband who used to own it, she was actually the woman that we dealt with there. So now it will be this company. I don't know if we've done any ghost tours with them or not, but they literally, I think they've got in 80 cities, they have ghost tours. So
goodness,
this has really become a thing for them. And there's not a lot of people that are happy that he owns this because he's added things like they have axe throwing
Oh, good grief.
And
Oh, boy.
other things they've added in, seances and things like that. So some
Tourism.
people, yes, he's made it much more touristy, and people are not necessarily as happy about this. Interestingly, Leanne Wilbers, who I'm sure most people are familiar with when it comes to the Lizzie Borden House, because she's really the one who put it on the map. When she sold this to Lance Zoll, 4 days later, she passed away.
Oh, wow.
And she was only 50.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what got her, but tours are offered and ghost cams have been installed for people to watch activity online. And why would there be ghost cams, Kelly? Because this house is considered one of the most haunted in the country.
Some people claim Lizzie haunts the house, but it mainly seems to hold the spirits of Abby and Andrew. There could be others here, though. Andrew's uncle had lived on the same property earlier in a house next door, and his wife had tried to drown their children in the well, successfully killing 2 of the 3, and then committed suicide by slicing her own throat with the straight razor.
Oh my gosh.
Ugh. Is there an evil entity here that fed off the discourse in the family? Did it lead family members to kill each other? Guests and employees of the bed and breakfast have all reported unexplained occurrences. A woman is heard softly weeping. The apparition of a woman in Victorian clothing is also seen. This spirit sometimes appears to be dusting furniture or straightening beds, and this is while people are still in the beds.
I always say if a spirit's going to be cleaning, they can come hang out at my house.
Indeed. The typical opening and closing of doors happens, and disembodied footsteps are heard in the hallways and on the stairs. Cold spots are felt throughout the house that seem to be more than just drafts. Many claim crazy activity in the basement. People have been pushed, scratched, and cameras set up for recording have been physically moved by an unseen entity. One visitor claimed that he entered his room and found it in an orderly fashion. He turned his back to the bed as he unpacked, and when he turned around, he found the bed rumpled and indented as if a body were lying atop the bed. The pillow was indented as if a head were lying on it. The rooms at the bed and breakfast each have distinct names, named after family members. One woman reported the following after her friend stayed in the Bridget room. I just spoke to my friend in Pennsylvania tonight who stayed years ago in the Bridget room. She told me she awoke in the middle of the night and she felt as if someone was sitting on the end of the bed. She evidently turned on the light and could see a depression where they were sitting.
Username Ravencrow wrote on Reddit in 2021, "For the record, I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm skeptical of all paranormal experiences, but will certainly admit when something is creepy and can't be easily explained. I didn't go into this stay expecting or hoping to have any kind of experience. We stayed in one of the attic rooms, the Knowlton room, which had a large toy chest in the corner. I had no issue with the room and found it cute and comfortable, but when I went to sleep, I had awful dreams all night. It was a hyper-realistic dream. I was lying in the very same bed I was actually sleeping in, feeling terrified. I was trying to fall back to sleep, but it was difficult because of the strong sense of fear and because I was so thirsty. My throat felt like paper. I wanted to get up and get a drink of water from the bathroom, but I was too afraid. I felt that if I opened my eyes, I would see somebody in the room. I lay there for what felt like hours, trying to fall back to sleep so that morning would come. At one point, I heard what sounded like a ball go bouncing across the floor. I heard it the second time, and I woke my friend who was sleeping next to me to ask if she'd heard it, but she hadn't, and it didn't happen again. I assume I dreamed this whole part because she doesn't remember me waking her up. Then at some point, I think I woke up for real because I was suddenly aware I was lying in bed with my eyes open, and the fear was suddenly lifted, and the room felt completely normal. It was like a cloud was lifted from my mind, which I sometimes feel when I'm struggling to wake up and I finally pull out of it. I was still thirsty.
AF?
Yes, though.
To quote what he wrote.
I didn't think much of my bad dream until the tour guide started to mention experiences other guests had had while sleeping in the house. When we went to the attic, the guide told us that a lot of people who sleep there hear the sound of playing at night. I asked if anyone had reported hearing a ball bouncing across the floor, and she said that's pretty common. And why do I ask? She also refused to go into the attic guest rooms. She let us explore, but despite having no issue with the murder room and master bedroom, she wouldn't go in the Knowlton room. This could have been just an act to enhance the tour's spookiness. I've also since learned that bad dreams are very common in that room. For the record, I don't typically have dreams like this. I have no problem sleeping in strange places. I've stayed at many hotels and inns and friends' houses. And while I may have restless dreams, I don't have nightmares, especially not these vividly realistic ones where I'm just lying in bed feeling afraid. I've only had a dream like this once before, shortly after I'd moved into my current apartment and was sleeping alone in my new room. No one ever lived in that part of the attic. It was open storage space and was only converted into guest rooms when the house became a bed and breakfast. So there's no reason for why there would be children ghosts in the attic, let alone any ghosts at all. I know the tour guides claim that the attic is the most haunted part of the house, but there isn't really a logical reason for this. There were some children who were murdered next door, and they claim that those children come to visit, but I don't know. Maybe the atmosphere cultivates bad dreams. I did look at the toy chest before going to bed, so that probably influenced my dream, but I didn't notice any balls in it, just dolls and stuffed animals. I wonder if ghosts are kind of like hot air, Kelly. They rise.
Okay. Like, what? Where are you going with this?
I mean, that was the only thing I could even explain with it. But this was a boarding house later. We don't know what happened.
Did any interim?
Yeah, did any children die in the boarding house possibly?
Keisha Say on Reddit posted, I corresponded a long time with a serious-minded, unfanciful elderly American. Ultra matter-of-fact. Worshipped facts and clearly detested the imagination becoming involved in anything. We were researching together something utterly unconnected to the paranormal, and I cannot think of anyone less likely to subscribe to the notion of ghosts. We happened to mention ghost tourism in the States one day, and he told me this. A long time ago, before the Borden House was a B&B, when it was a printing company, and before it earned its lucrative reputation for haunting, he stayed with the owners, whom he liked, and been put up on the top floor in Bridget Sullivan's room. In the dead of night, he was awoken by the clear sound of keys jangling as if carried up the stairs outside. No one was there. He tried to suppose he imagined it, but the sound was startlingly loud.
You love that. This is somebody who doesn't really make up fanciful tales.
He doesn't cotton to it.
Yeah, and he's very matter-of-factly. So for
very
him
practical.
To even be like, yeah, I do kind of believe in ghosts because I had this thing happen. Probably doesn't like to talk about that stuff that much. And it definitely fits because they needed keys to open all the doors.
True.
USA Today talked to a manager named Jared in 2021, and he told the reporter that he had seen doors move on their own. His parents were caretakers of the house in the 1990s, and when he was a kid, he saw a shadow figure move in the basement. The article also reported, the new owner encountered a few different things. In May of this year, when sleeping in the Bridget Sullivan room, the wind-up cat toy on the chest started to play on its own. In February, in the Andrew suite, he stayed alone in the house and heard voices, footsteps, and furniture move. Then one night, he felt a presence enter the side room he was staying in, surround him, touch his leg, and pull on the comforter. It was just welcoming him. You bought the house?
Sounded helpful. Get him all tucked in, snuggled up before they bash his head in.
Sure. Guess what else you bought, dude?
Are the spirits of the Bordens still living in their home in the afterlife? Is there an evil spirit on this property? Did Lizzie Borden kill Andrew and Abby? Is the Lizzie Borden house haunted?
That is for you to decide. Well, Kelly, what do you think? Did Lizzie do it?
I'm leaning toward she probably did.
Yeah. I think she did. I do know that when we recorded this episode the first time around, I put forward the idea that I thought maybe it was possible that Emma had done something because she had an alibi. Oh, I was off at, some family's house because we had this big old fight, but who's to say she didn't come back to town?
I mean, if they were being cut out of the will, I kind of lend it to possibly both existing daughters.
Yeah. So. Did they all work together? Bridget, Emma, and Lizzie?
Could be.
We'll never know. We'll never have the evidence to prove anything, but interesting crime for sure. The other thing is, I think we watched, was it a Kindred Spirits where they went to Maplecroft? And they were the first people, I think, that got to investigate there.
I believe it was Kindred Spirits.
And I think they got Lizzie there, and they might have done the Lizzie Borden house too, and they said they weren't getting Lizzie there. So when people say, oh, we get Lizzie at the Lizzie Borden house, probably not very likely. She clearly loved Maplecroft, and that's where she wanted to be. So I don't think she would come back to the scene of her possible crime.
Well, kind of like when we investigated the Villisca axe murder house, we don't think that the murderer is actually hanging around.
No, there's a lot of people who say that he's there.
We didn't have any negativity, not just even in the feelings or responses.
Well, especially if you believe that whoever was the axe murderer was the one that was traveling the rails and maybe axe murdering a bunch of people. He wouldn't just, I'm going to, this random house here, I'll go ahead and hunt this one. He's
right.
He's got other places where his spirit's hanging out. I could think of, like hell, maybe. All right. Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us for this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.